Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archive Surprise. Sorry about that. It's an archive surprise, so why not start off with a surprise? So like Mike mentioned, I'm Ali Rospond. I'm the Museum Education Coordinator here at the American Philosophical Society, or APS. Today we'll be looking at a couple of objects that you might not have thought might have been in our collection or you didn't know about, or that they existed. A couple of housekeeping things. Sorry, I'm going to repeat what Mike's been repeating before we go forward. We're using Zoom webinar, so you are muted and your screens are turned off. If you have any questions throughout the program, please put them in the Q&A below. Live transcriptions should be going on right now on your screen. If not, and you need to use them, please click on the dot on the live transcription button down below, and you can turn those on. And just remember, we'll be using polls throughout the program, so they'll be quick, so don't worry for them being on your screen for too long. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. And we will start off with our first poll, if you can run that, Mike. All right. So our first one is, have you heard of the APS before today? Ooh, pretty well here. All right, yep. So it looks like we got, let's see, sure. Looks like we had 100% there for yes. If people have heard about the APS before, that's fantastic. We love to see it, and we welcome you all back to our program today. But just in case, we're going to go a little bit over the APS. So the American Philosophical Society was founded in 1743 by Benjamin Franklin to promote useful knowledge. And that we always like to say useful knowledge means not just sitting around talking about something, but Franklin wanted you to go out and take that useful knowledge and have a positive impact on society. Now today, the APS is still a functioning, functional scholarly society, a library, and a museum. And that's our library over there, Library Hall. It holds around 14 million manuscripts, and its major collection areas include early American history, history of science, anthropology, and Native American and Indigenous languages. But let's get to our first object for today. So, APS minutes. Now you might be like, all right, hold on a second, Ali. These are meeting minutes from the APS in 1784. What's so surprising about that? So, pretty normal, right? We're a scientific society that holds meetings. We also have the notes recorded. But what's really interesting is what's in these minutes. And so let's take a closer look. So 1784. So in this one, in August 12, 1784, the Marquis de Lafayette visits the APS, and he's talking to them about mesmerism, or something called animal magnetism. So I'll read to you what this says on your screen here. The Marquis de Lafayette entertained the society with a particular relation of the wonderful effects of a certain invisible power in nature called animal magnetism, lately discovered by Mr. Mesmer, a German philosopher, and explained by him to a number of gentlemen in Paris, of which number the Marquis was himself one. By this relation, it appears that persons may be so impregnated with the power by a process which the Marquis does not think himself at liberty yet to explain, as to exhibit many phenomena similar to those of metallic magnetism. Now, stay with me here as I get into what mesmerism, or also animal magnetism, is. Now, like the minutes say, it came from Franz Anton Mesmer, where he healed people through an invisible magnetic fluid. So he would say if you were sick, you had an illness, it was caused from a blockage of this magnetic fluid. And Mesmer cured his patients by his hands, which were magnetized. He magnetized in a way. Or he touched patients with a rod that was also magnetized. And this invisible healing property would heal people in general. But now remember to stay with me here. It's a little strange from what you can hear. But Mesmer and also people in Germany, when he started this sort of practice, slowly grew suspicious. So he wound up leaving Germany for France, specifically Paris, in 1778. And so he set up shop for his therapy there. And what really kind of made people pause, especially scientists, was that Mesmer kind of kept his procedures secret about how they really kind of worked, which is the opposite of during this time in the 1700s, right? Natural philosophers or scientists share their ideas freely, right, to explain how the world worked through experimentation and observation. Mesmer was a little mysterious and private about it. But soon gossip would slowly spread in France about what Mesmer was doing. And people were concerned because a lot of his patients were women. A lot of the reactions to animal magnetism did deal with a lot of, it was very flamboyant, so people would scream, they would faint after going through this healing. A lot of the patients were women. So concern about the legitimacy of this science, of what he called a science at the time, even concerned the king of France, King Louis the 16th. And so he created a committee in 1784, now the same year as those minutes were written, to look into mesmerism and animal magnetism. Now what you see here is a book which actually looked into and criticized mesmerism. So the book is called Anti-Magnetism, Origin, Progress, Decadence, Renewal, and Refutation of Animal Magnetism. And of course, it's not the APS if we don't mention Franklin. So part of one of these commissions looking into the legitimacy of animal magnetism is Benjamin Franklin. He is in France at this time. He is at Passy out there. So he at this point, he's a little bit older, so he's not able to get back and forth to Paris as much. So while they're doing experiments, testing out this animal magnetism for its legitimacy in Paris, they're also doing experiments out in Passy with Franklin and those in his household. And now, during these experiments, they dealt with groups of people undergoing different mesmer treatments. They would test people who thought they were being magnetized when they weren't, or those who thought they were being magnetized and they weren't. And in the end, they concluded that people who thought they were being magnetized, whether or not it was true, had the strongest kind of response to animal magnetism. But what's interesting in the end is that what they say is what people get out of this would later be what's called a placebo effect. So this curative power is not real. It's just in people's minds. So his patients expected to have some sort of healing properties or feel better, so they felt a little better. So it kind of was like a trick of the mind. They thought they were getting better, so they felt better. And so really these committees in Paris condemn, which is one of them is the Academy of Sciences, condemn Mesmer. Now on this page, you'll see this book is mocking Mesmer's treatments. So this would be Mesmer right here, going up to the moon where he's magnetized, he's getting his magnetizing himself, so either with his hand or a pole. There's a woman down here who women were a lot of times many of his patients. And this was also a spectacle in itself. When they had either individuals or groups, there was also music playing. There might have been smoke also going around, which could also symbolize too the hidden nature of how Mesmer did this. But also you could see him, see a jester behind Mesmer right here, kind of crowning him. And it's also an air, he's held up by a hot air balloon, which could also be a tongue-in-cheek of Mesmer being full of hot air. So you can see here this book how certain scientific groups felt about Mesmer's processes. Now remember, this is the same year as those APS minutes, where Lafayette is saying even he does not know how to describe it, such as this big curative power. So 4 months after Lafayette brought up mesmerism to the APS receives news from the Academy of Sciences in France that condemn Mesmer's theories. So it's pretty cool to see this communication across seas too, of like popular interest of this pseudoscience at the time, this fake science. And then later on, how other societies come together to kind of prove or disprove and spread this information about what they came across. All right, that's our first object. Let's do a poll for our second one now. Oh no, not poll. All right, now this is for the chat. So there's a word on your screen right now, you see here, this guy. Write in the chat below what you think it says. So let's see, write in the chat what you think it says. It's a little bit harder, not the greatest handwriting, but what do you think it says? See if anyone can get in there. All right. We're getting election. Those are good guesses. What else? All right. There's a couple more minutes. A minute. All right. Okay, so we have election, we have selection, we have electron. These are all good. And the answer is, let's see, selection. Mary, you were right. So yeah, so this is selection. So our next object then, so this is the full view of the object of our paper, of our manuscript. And so with selection, of course, we're going to talk about Charles Darwin and natural selection. So this letter is from Charles Darwin, author of Origins of Species and the Theory of Natural Selection, to his close friend and colleague, geologist Charles Lyell. Now, let's get into a little bit of history behind this first. Charles Darwin was born on February 12th, 1809. He was from a wealthy family. Here he is right here. And he was expected to really continue on. His father was a doctor. He was supposed to be a doctor. He didn't want to do that. He wound up dropping out from being a doctor. He went on to study to be a country clergyman, where he would finish. But in 1831, he heard that Captain Robert Fitzroy, captain of the ship Beagle, was looking for a naturalist to accompany them when they were circumnavigating the globe. So Darwin jumped on his chance. He managed to convince his family to help him with the money for this. He goes on a 5-year voyage, and he returns in 1836 with the Beagle. And he becomes famous after publishing his findings, because throughout his time at sea and when they're visiting different islands, he's making observations. He's a very big fan of Alexander von Humboldt. He's reading Charles Lyell's book as well on board the ship, and then comparing their findings from what he sees, as well as collecting specimens as he goes. And once he collects certain specimens, when they're at ports, he'll send them back to England. And through this voyage, Darwin would begin to create his theory that species might evolve over time. And he becomes really famous from this voyage because he publishes The Voyage of Beagle in 1839. And his famous theory of natural selection, he comes across this by looking at the finches in the Galapagos Islands. And Darwin thought that maybe because they were isolated on these islands geographically, that these finches had all really evolved from an ancestor that had come to the island a long time ago. So let's get back to our object here. So the object had this cutout part at the beginning. So now this letter from one scientist to another might not be surprising, right? But the contents and story behind it will surprise you. In this letter, Darwin is writing to his friend and actually talking about how he shouldn't have called, let's go back here, he shouldn't have called his famous theory, or maybe he was having, doubts about calling his famous theory natural selection. And perhaps he should have called it natural preservation instead. Now, natural selection is a theory that living organisms adapt and change based on changes in their environments in order to survive over time. Darwin continues in this letter to share his doubts because other scientists are not fully on board with this theory, right? He's growing frustrated because he doesn't know if it's because he didn't describe it very well when in different publications with the name. But he also you know, with this frustration of name is also because of he knows that people have different preconceived ideas coming into this too that might cause their doubts, such as divine intervention, and how could things like extinction, which a lot of people didn't believe in, happen through God's will, or about how the environment is so bad that things have to adapt over time. So he's going back and forth about whether or not he should have named it something else. So much so that he, in this, if you look at here, he's like, it's a little bit hard. It takes some time to read, but selection was obviously impossible with plants. So he's talking about a colleague at one point saying, like, how can plants select whether to change or not? So selection at this point too, he goes back and forth. It's already out there. He can't change it. And so that's all well and good. And he's telling his friend all about this. However, since we had somewhat of a trouble reading this letter, think about Charles Lyell reading his letter, sitting down and trying to get through this, and he's having a hard time reading. Now, if you can't read someone's notes, you might be able to give him a call and be like, hey, can you come over and tell me what this says? There's no phones in the 1800s here. So what does Charles do? He cuts out that section, that phrase that he can't read, and he sends it back to Darwin and asks him, what does it say? Like, so you can see here, this is the cutout section, and then it says at the bottom right here, natural preservation with the question mark. So he's trying to figure it out. And then luckily he gets confirmation later on. So it is kind of funny to see really back then, people were still having trouble reading each other's handwritings, and it's simple as just mailing it back and forth, asking for clarification. The APS as well has the largest collection of Darwin manuscripts in North America. These holdings are second to only the Darwin collection in England. The Valentine Darwin collection as well contains around 4,800 Darwin books, and the AAPS is the largest repository of Darwin publications in the world, with many first editions of Darwin's 17 books and translations on the origin of species in 22 languages. So a lot of fun facts about Darwin in our collection. He's a big hit, but trying to look through his handwriting is a little hard at times. All right. So for our next one, there's natural preservation right there. All right. So for our next poll, this is going to be maybe a little bit harder. If we can get our first poll in, what is this? Without any context at all, what is? Huh? Okay. All right. All right. All right. Looks like we might have enough. All right. So it seems like we are a little bit all over the place here with this poll, right? Some think it's a campfire, some think it's a bug, some think it's a balloon. All right. So let's go to our next one. Does this help? Let's bring the poll back again and try it again. What do we think this is? You'll see the poll soon enough on your screen. There we go. What is it? All right, we got balloon. Oh, a lot of people think it's a balloon. Now we have some different choices. Some of you think it's a UFO, some of you think it's a bug, some of you think it's a balloon. All right. All right. So as you can see here, we've got some changes now. All right. So maybe this next one will help you all out. All right. Third time's the charm. How about now? All right. Poll again. This one's a much easier one. Oh, some think a bug, something a UFO. I can see both of those. All right, so we're gonna end the poll real quick, share the results. So a large majority think this is a UFO. Some of you think it's a bug. So all these drawings are the same thing that people have described, and they are all describing it's a possible UFO. So our next item here, so all those drawings you saw were people's descriptions of UFOs. So our next item here is actually going to be a case involving a UFO sightings. So science explains the world around us, but what about stuff that's not of this planet? So this case file of a UFO sighting from Red Vale, Colorado on April 6, 1967. So we're taking a big jump here. And this in this case file, they describe a large glowing object. So just like we've seen in the past couple of objects, people investigating and coming up with theories of things around us, this manuscript here is investigating what these witnesses saw that might not be from this planet. So this might be more surprising to you too, that we have some of these collections of investigations into unidentified flying objects. And this object is found in our Edward U. Condon papers. Edward Condon was a theoretical physicist, and from 1966 to 68, he headed at the University of Colorado the scientific study of unidentified flying objects. And its aim was to investigate claims of UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And this was headed by the Air Force at this time. Now, this report goes into the systematic way that they investigated UFOs. So this case, as they say in the paper, here it is, on the night of April 6, 1967, an 18-year-old high school boy who they identify as Witness 1 was returning from a first aid class in Norwood, Colorado, to his parents' house, a general store in Dry Creek Basin, 20 miles southwest of Redville. His route was along Colorado Highways 145 and 80. He reported that shortly after 11 p.m., when he was 3 miles west of Norwood, he noticed an object high in the sky directly ahead of him. He compared its apparent size and brightness to an ordinary incandescent light bulb seen at about 20 feet, or a slow-moving ball of fire. So we saw from that one description, one of the illustrations, that one looked like a ball of fire, right? As he continued, the object descended at an angle towards his left, closed on his automobile, and accompanied it at a distance and elevation he estimated at 100 feet. He estimated the dimensions of the object as approximately 30 by 100 feet. It was shaped like an inverted bowl, flat on the bottom, arched on top. And the description goes on to say about how he felt, how this boy actually felt the heat from this object. And in the end, he said it might have damaged his car as well. So throughout this, this report, you'll see different descriptions of the UFO. And so this one's saying there's little windows here. There's a snake-like thing coming from the bottom. This above description from another witness said it had a white and blue glow. It's almost like a saucer on top. So they systematically really talk to those witnesses that they can identify, that have seen it, to see really what they saw, their experience, and they continue on with like a questionnaire. So it's really interesting. They are very systematic about this, and they want to see, they want to know what these people saw, so they can investigate further whether these claims are legitimate or not. But let's get to the history behind this, right? What led us to this point in Colorado in the 1960s? And it starts in 1947, where a businessman, while flying his plane, reports seeing objects moving in the sky above Washington's Mount Rainier. And he publicizes what his experience, and this leads to an increased reported sightings of UFOs. And over time, because of World War II and also just rocket science in general, people are becoming more interested in what's out there, and more UFO sightings are on the rise. And some people, even like President Truman, were afraid that these UFO sightings might incur hysteria among the public. So because of these initial UFO sightings, in 1948, the US Air Force begins investigating these alleged sightings in an operation called Operation Sign. And this would later result in the creation of Project Blue Book in 1952. And Project Blue Book became the longest running of the US government's official investigations into UFO sightings. And it would go on throughout its time to report on 12,000 events relating to possible UFOs from 1952 to 1969. And so you can see that UFOs are really in the public's mind during this time. And from Project Blue Book in 1968, the Air Force created another committee to look into 59 UFO sightings that were investigated by Project Blue Book. This committee was headed by our friend, Dr. Condon, who was based at the University of Colorado that we mentioned before. And Condon would compile his conclusions in what's now known as the Condon Report in 1968. And the report concluded in the end that there really was no evidence of any unusual activity, and recommended the Air Force stop investigating into UFO-related incidents. And this would lead to the end of Project Blue Book. But UFOs never leave the human and public imagination. Now, let's quickly jump back to this case. So what did they say in the end from this conclusion? After talking to various witnesses, getting their descriptions, they concluded that on the basis of available evidence, it is impossible to say whether or not the event reported is real. So I guess that's a no answer there. So they're not sure. So that's kind of fun to see the really systematic and government approach to figuring out if there's anything out there. Now, UFOs never leave the imaginations here. So this is a coloring book from the 1970s, which is also in our collections. And that's the cool thing and fantastic thing about archives. They are windows, their collections are windows into the past about what people are interested in. And there are certainly coloring books, magazines, books, novels, fiction novels about UFOs all throughout time and people's interest in them. And so this is the front of the UFO coloring book. And then this is some pages that are actually in this coloring book. And if you look here, this little guy kind of looks like our UFO from the drawing from the beginning. So that imagery of UFO kind of never leaves people's minds. It also kind of looks like a bug too. So that was actually a fun, interesting poll question. So yeah, so our UFO design kind of doesn't really change too much from that saucer appearance. All right. So our last and final object for today. Let's get our last poll in here. And as you see here, that is a map of the United States, an older map. All right, so what were explorers instructed to document when they went on expeditions west? And you can select any that apply here. Ooh, yep. Okay, it looks like, I think we got it. All right, so let's see our results. You're all right. It's actually all these things. When people went out west, they were, especially when Jefferson was the head of these kind of expeditions, when he was the head of instructions for the expeditions, he wanted people to report on plants, animals. He was looking to see if mammoths were still out in the West. He did not believe in extinction at the time, so he was they were finding these mammoth bones on the East Coast, if you remember Charles Wilson Peel's great mastodon. So when he had people go out west for these expeditions, he also included them looking for mammoths if they were out there, or also any kind of fossils. Weather, if people are expanding west or going out west, they're not quite sure what the weather or climate's like. So if they want people to settle, they need to note that down. The indigenous people that they come across, their society, their culture, who they are. And then also the most important for the United States politically were routes. They were trying to find the quickest way to the Pacific to help them out with their own commerce. But let's look at what this object is then. So this is the Michaud subscription. This document, written in Thomas Jefferson's hand, was for French botanist André Michaud to explore the West all the way to the Pacific to find the closest route. And in 1793, and throughout it, he's supposed to collect these specimens, collect information about the indigenous people, and also keep an eye out for any mammoths or certain animals there. So think of this as a proposal Lewis and Clark 1.0. And this contains the signatures of people who donated money to help fund this expedition down here at the bottom. And this is the only known existing document that contains the first 4 presidents' signatures. And you can see here the names of people and also how much money they donated. So here's Washington, who donated $100. John Adams, it's a little stingy here with $20. We have Thomas Jefferson, who donated $50. And then James Madison right over here. It looks like he also only donated $20. But you might notice other names who are familiar to you, since this is also a great document to show how the expansion west and finding out information about what's out there, both scientifically and also commercially, to help for roots crossed party lines. So early political parties, both sides of those parties are all donating money for this expedition west. And you can also see there's Robert Morris, there's Alexander Hamilton. And so there's a lot of people donating money, wanting to find out, help this scientific and political expedition. Now, in the end, though, this expedition never really gets underway. Michaud gets caught up in early American politics with Citizen Genet, and so we'll get to that in just a second. But let's learn more about our friend, André Michaud. And he was a leading botanist of his day. He was born outside of Versailles on the countryside, and he came to attention of certain people due to his prowess in agriculture. So much so that they actually, certain nobles sent him out for to be educated in different cities, such as Paris and London. And he came to the attention of the king. He got sent out different expeditions around the world until finally the king decided that it was in their best interest for Michaud to travel to the United States in 1785. He was looking to collect plants that could help the French cause, but also look for oak trees, which were interesting too, so they could help replenish French forests. Of course, while Michaud is in the United States, the French Revolution happens, and after the king and queen have been killed, he loses his funding. And so we get to 1790s, 1792, and then later into 1793, where he wants to explore the West. He thinks there's a lot of stuff he could collect and be able to bring back to the French cause, to the French nation, but he needs funding. So he makes friends while he's here to certain APS members like William Bartram and Benjamin Swiss Barton. And he proposes maybe helping fund him to go out west. And they bring this to Jefferson, who's always been wanting to investigate what's out there. And so he brings the APS in, because Thomas Jefferson is also very much part of the APS before, during, and after his presidency. And he gets the APS to come together, create committees to also help fund this even more on top of the subscription, but also come up with instructions for Michaud, which involved, first and foremost, the shortest route to the Pacific Ocean, right? They commercially would like an advantage over others, but they also were to, like we mentioned before, collect information on the native and indigenous groups along the way, look for the mammoth. And so this document does, and this whole expedition does, reflect the scientific interests during the time that also coincide politically with the national interests as well. But it's also really interesting to see too that APS, which is not a government organization, was really a big backer of this expedition. And it's the initial, this is the beginning of really APS funded expeditions. Charles Willson Peale's, when he goes to dig up his mastodon in the 1800s, The APS helps fund part of that expedition, as well as certain Arctic expeditions with Elijah Kincaid. So this is really the beginning of seeing the APS help fund certain scientific expeditions. Now, this story, though, of how really this Michaud subscription came to our attention, that story starts in 1979. So the story behind this is that an intern was cleaning out an old vault in our library, and he came across this box, which had this scrolled up piece of parchment with a red ribbon tied around it. Of course, that sounds really fun, right? You don't know what this is. The intern brings it to a librarian. He unscrolls it and realizes this is the Michaud subscription, Lewis and Clark 1.0, has all these signatures, the first 4 signatures of the US president, and it is literally an archive surprise for this person, finding it in our collections from long ago, because it was probably deposited by Jefferson or one of those other people on the committee. So this is literally an archive surprise, being able to find something that you least expected in the collections. And so really that's a fun thing about archives. There's always something new every year. When we make when the museum creates their exhibition, there's always fun little stories and fun little things you find that you least expect. And so I'm going to end it with that today. Sometimes when you least expect it, you find a fun thing. But I'll leave it open to questions now. So thank you all for coming out today. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. Thanks, Mary.
To say, somebody in the chat said sadly jellyfish is not available for the UFO, and I
oh, that was a good one.
Jellyfish.
Oh, that was a good one.
No questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat or into the Q&A feature. We've got plenty of time to answer those for you.
Sad about the jellyfish now. No questions? Can be on anything of the last couple objects. And it's also okay too, but there's a lot of cool objects in our collection, so it is hard to really narrow it down to just 4 for today.
The questions can also be surprises. I think that is absolutely true. That's right. That's
what are you getting me to?
So we have a question about why do we have the pronouns after our names. That's just a practice that we use to make sure that anybody that uses he, him, she, her, they, them, other forms of pronouns feel welcome in the spaces that we produce for these programs.
Mm-hmm.
Questions can be surprises.
Yeah.
So Mesmer had a violet wand.
What was that?
The question. So Mesmer had a violet wand.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen any colored descriptions of it. It just kind of looks like a metal wand. Maybe that was it. It looks like a metal wand. Also in that picture that we saw, there was also a compass, and it showed that it was working, so that they're trying to bring that image of like magnetic pole that they said that Mesmer's saying he's using to heal people.
Great. So we had somebody who visited the exhibition this weekend to hear about weather-wise, history of climate science in America. What can you tell us about the APS's involvement in the history of climate and weather?
So the APS from the very beginning, especially in the 1780s, were interested in the collection of weather data over time. Now remember, today we get our weather from just an app in 5 seconds, but back then you it was really hard to try and forecast the weather. Sometimes it was just looking at patterns in the past of what the weather was like and gauging it from there. Other times people would use their observations, so their eyes, and also weather instruments to try and find patterns that way. And so the APS did at times put a call out. One of our objects actually talks about how there was a really bad winter and the APS puts a call out to the public to send them their findings. And so they can try and correlate and come up with information about the weather. We have members such as Franklin, who's trying to figure it out and explaining it in his meteorological observations and conjectures. We have Thomas Jefferson, who for most of his life is collecting weather data systematically in the morning and the afternoon. And he has other members such as, and his friends and colleagues such as James Madison, collect weather the same way, systematically following his guidelines. And so really in the early stages, APS members were coming together to collect data and share that data with each other and trying to figure it out. Later on it goes, we have commissions or committees with either like the Franklin Institute or the Academy of Natural Sciences to also collect data. So they were trying to figure out what this weather is, how they can protect themselves from it, but how can they also predict it? And that's pretty cool. Today, the APS has had community science projects with local schools such as Bodine High School and Newtown Middle School, where we've taught students to use weather instruments and also collect weather data, getting them to really think about the world around them and also topics such as climate science and climate change.
It's a worthwhile exhibition. I hope you enjoy your visit, or your son and grandsons enjoy the visit.
Yeah. Try not to give you a tour there of the exhibition. I could roll off. I could start doing that.
In another 45 minutes, we can do that.
Yeah.
So a question that popped into the chat: did Mesmer treat patients at a hospital in Paris?
Sometimes it could be like his certain residences too. So I think it depends on like where he was at. I don't know if it was like hospitals, but it was like his residences too, because it would be a really spectacle because there'd be music, there'd be people coming in and out. I wouldn't say really a hospital, but really kind of like a resident of his.
Another one, do you have information on how school was conducted in the US before John Dewey?
I'm sure we have some stuff in our collection. I don't know them off the top of my head.
Yeah, a lot of primers or early educational materials that would have been used more in homes. So I wouldn't say we necessarily collect like the history of education, but it happens to kind of pop up in family collections that have been given to the APS, which is a really fun kind of subset of things to discover along the way.
Yeah, if you look online, in the Peel exhibition, there's an image of the primers they drew, and they were, excuse me, they were more like patriotic at times. So saying certain letters with certain patriotic ideas. So they're actually pretty cool. But that was in the Peel online exhibition. There's one example of that in there.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a search on our library search collection. So it's a very fun subset.
Yeah.
Right, and then another one that popped in is the Academy of Natural Sciences has some specimens Lewis and Clark brought back. Does the APS have their papers, or where are they?
So there's a lot in that question. So the some of the specimens that the Academy has are actually not all of them, but some of them are actually the APS in the APS collection, but the Academy holds on to them for us. So some of those specimens are ours, but the Academy has a better space for them. And we do have Lewis and Clark journals and other related things, but I think it was 2 years ago we had one of the journals on display. So we do have many of the Lewis and Clark journals.
Oh, this is fun. Does the APS have any documentation of the Mischianza party held in Philadelphia by the British forces before they left Philly in 1779?
Would that be in the Rev?
I was going to say that's a great Rev City pitch. So they're developing an online portal, like a one-stop shop, essentially, for the history of the Revolution in Philadelphia, more from like the kind of everyday perspective. So I'm sure there are journals or documentations, probably broadsides that advertise that. I personally haven't done research on that in the APS collections, but it's bound to happen, especially now that we have the David Center for the American Revolution. I can only imagine what we have along those lines.
Yeah. Anything else? Those are quite surprising questions too.
That's fun, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yep. Oh, thank you for stopping by.
Into like answering mode.
Yeah.
All right then. So if there aren't any other questions, we will let everybody go a whole 10 minutes early, which is a lovely thing, the gift of time of sorts. Thank you all so much for stopping by this virtual program, Archive Surprise with Ali Rospond, our Museum Education Coordinator. It has been recorded, so it will be available on our website and YouTube channel shortly. But thank you all so much for attending this program. We hope you learned a lot about the APS, or were at least surprised by what.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.